I want to move to another angle on this Christian interpretation, which is that Girard has this disagreement with Friedrich Nietzsche. And in fact, he's so bold as to claim that Nietzsche made an error. So I will elaborate a little bit by what that means and then ask you about it. Nietzsche contrasts Christianity, the Christian ethos, with the Dionysian, right? And in both of these, let's say, mythological archetypes, I'm not here asserting that the Bible is necessarily all myth, but just for the sake of argument, in both these mythological arguments, there is sacrifice made, right? But he says, Girard, says that Nietzsche's error was in characterizing Christianity itself as a kind of slave morality, as rule by the mob. And in fact, contrary to Nietzsche, he says that it is the Dionysian impulse that is itself it is the mob violence, not the absence of violence or the removal of violence, which Girard attributes Christianity to being kind of the central driver for the decline in violence, culturally and even super culturally in humanity over generations. But Girard says that Nietzsche made this sort of fatal error in his characterization of slave morality as being so closely tied to Christianity because of the fact that in his day, he was more concerned with criticizing the power center of the church, the excesses of the church, what the church had become, the way in which it had become corrupted. And in fact, it is the Dionysian impulse, the sort of will for the lust for blood, for power, for destruction, that is the mob rule. It is not instead I don't even want to say peace, because he makes a big deal about the line where Christ says that he comes to bring a sword, and that actually the peace that he's bringing about will turn brother against brother and father against son. There is a kind of dialectic struggle that goes on throughout humanity to essentially learn the lesson of Christ over and over and over again, which is basically the lesson of the scapegoat. What do you think about Girard's criticism of Nietzsche here, that he got slave morality wrong?
Well, it's another example of what I was talking about before, is Girard's polemical bent, and he beautifully turns Nietzsche upside down. He does the same thing with Levi-Strauss in Violence and the Sacred, and it's beautiful the way he just turns somebody inside out. So the reversing of Nietzsche, I think, is pretty simple. That Nietzsche regards it as a criticism of the Bible, that it recognizes victims and it sides with victims, identifies with victims. And for Nietzsche, yes, according to Girard, this is what an unsuccessful race, an unsuccessful tribe does. It sees its own experience and others and makes a religion out of it. And said, but he also does say that in this paradoxical way, that Nietzsche is one of the greatest theologians of the 19th century, because he sees this. He sees the connection between the Hebrew scriptures and identification with the victim, as you showed in the two prostitutes. I mean, imagine, that story is often called Solomon's wisdom, really excited by his flash, and you can almost imagine some self-satisfied ruler saying, well, I'll show you, I'll get my sword out and I'll cut it in half. And the crowd is going, whoa, that's so clever. I mean, this is a very dangerous man to tell that you were lying. He's already got his sword out. Never mind being judged guilty. He's got his sword out. The quarrel with Nietzsche, Nietzsche is a center of explanatory power, And so I think what you see in Girard in general, going after Freud, going after is wrong, uh, uh, giving a mimetic reading of Freud, giving a mimetic reading of Levi Strauss in Violence and the Sacred, that quarreling with Nietzsche is the same thing. That in effect, it would be like the internet. You're after audiences. You're polemically arguing for your ideas to supersede or to encapsulate or hijack somebody else's ideas. So it really is a quarrel with Nietzsche. It really does turn Nietzsche upside down, and um, that's about when you actually look at how much of Nietzsche Girard is willing to discuss. It's not very much, you know.
Mm,
So um, I don't think there's any future in in celebrating Dionysus. I mean,
mm,
we had Diane Wachowski in our English department. She used to talk about Dionysus all the time, and it was really cool. But that's bad. Bataille, Georges Bataille, you know, in France, and that there's this crazy, you know, you can't go back to sacrifice. So I think Girard's analysis of Dionysus is as strong as Nietzsche's, and it leads him to say this is not anything. There's no future in that. There's no future in going back to sacrifice. In the Clausewitz book, he goes back to Hölderlin, the German poet, and tries to show, and maybe that's his way of sort of indirectly taking on a little bit of Nietzsche, that Hölderlin wants to see the other gods as brothers to Jesus, and Girard's take on Hölderlin is that he's someone who, in fact, whose understanding of mimetic consequence, social consequences, and sacrifice, and so on, is superior to Hegel and to Clausewitz, his contemporaries. But it was it was very dangerous to Hölderlin. You know, that Hölderlin eventually recognized how bedeviled he was by competition with his fellow poets, models, Schelling, and so on, and found that the only way to get out of it was to retire to the tower, just get out of it. And that's a somewhat of a simplification of a complex subject of when people really can't, you know, I mean, as a literature professor, for me, it's Septimus Smith and Wolf Smith's Dalloway. You know, when somebody really at the very, they may be at the very edge of their thinking, but they're at the very edge of no longer being able to keep themselves alive. And um, so yeah, I think that I think there's a life for Nietzsche's work after Girard. You know, this is just this is one foothold. You know, you're going up a ladder, and so and just as there's a life after Girard for Freud
mm.
and for Levi Strauss, wonderful intelligences open up all kinds of doors. And many of the people who follow Girard, Giuseppe Fornario, who published his massive 2-volume work, so he still talks about Freud and Levi Strauss and so on. So
Yeah.
Girard is a particular kind of intelligence, a battler. He's rarely uh, a full-fledged scholar. I think if you know what I mean. But
Yeah. So is this his form of imitation then?
of rivalry with the,
Yes.
yeah, yeah, that would be um, a something that Girard recognized himself.